At Lisbon Airport, a police dog suddenly blocks a veteran pilot from boarding his plane, causing outrage and delays. But when security inspects the pilot's uniform, they uncover a tiny hidden electronic device, one designed to trigger a bomb planted beneath the cockpit seat. It turns out the pilot is part of a global terror network plotting to detonate 3 planes over the Atlantic simultaneously, aiming to paralyze the world's aviation system. And the chilling truth is, if the dog hadn't reacted, no one would have noticed. From that moment on, a high-stakes hunt across Europe begins, and leading the charge is the very same dog, whose instinct and a single bark saved hundreds of lives. The cold morning wind swept through Lisbon's Humberto Delgado Airport, carrying with it the scent of jet fuel, sea salt, and tense impatience. Inside Terminal A, the glass walls shimmered with early spring sunlight, casting long reflections on the polished floors as travelers shuffled toward their gates with heavy coats and heavier eyes. Officer Clara Mendez zipped up her dark blue uniform jacket and adjusted her duty belt as she scanned the crowd. She had worked security at the airport for 8 years, but mornings like this still made her heart beat a little faster. She glanced down at her partner, Rocco, a sleek and powerful German shepherd who sat obediently at her side. His amber eyes were focused, his breath forming clouds in the chill of the concourse. Rocco had been with Clara for 4 years. He was not the loudest dog in the K9 unit, nor the fastest, but he was the most precise. His quiet intensity had earned him a reputation among the team. They called him the Sentinel. He did not react without purpose, and when he did, Clara knew to trust him without hesitation. "Come on, boy," she whispered, patting his side. They moved as one, weaving through clusters of passengers and luggage carts, their steps practiced and fluid. Clara's eyes moved with the rhythm of experience, checking for anything unusual. A bag left alone too long. A face that turned away too quickly. But this morning felt routine. Rocco walked with calm alertness, his nose occasionally lifting to catch a scent before returning to heel position. At Gate 14, a flight crew moved through the restricted lane. They wore tailored Navy uniforms, polished shoes, and matching leather flight bags. Clara gave them a glance, barely slowing her pace. Pilots passed through this corridor all day long. Then Rocco stopped. It was not abrupt. It was deliberate. His body stiffened, ears perked, and his gaze fixed on one man in the group. Clara paused, following his line of sight. Captain Adrian Lutz. The pilot had a confident stride, silver-streaked hair combed perfectly, and a calm expression that suggested authority. His Idaho badge swung from his neck. He offered a courteous nod to the security officer at the crew gate. But Rocco growled. It was low and sharp, a sound that vibrated through Clara's chest. She tensed immediately. The last time she heard that growl, Rocco had uncovered a concealed blade under a tourist's belt buckle. "Rocco, heel," she ordered gently. But he did not move. Instead, the shepherd stepped forward, placing himself directly in the pilot's path. His tail was stiff, his legs rooted. Captain Lutz stopped, startled. He looked down, annoyance creeping into his face. "Excuse me, officer. Can you control your dog?" Clara stepped beside Rocco, one hand on his harness. "I apologize, Captain," she said. "My partner is trained to alert only when necessary. May I ask you to step aside for a moment?" Lutz frowned. "I am the lead pilot for Flight 417 to New York. We are already delayed. This is unacceptable." His voice remained polite but pressed. Clara glanced at her watch. He was right. Departure was already 20 minutes behind schedule due to an earlier weather delay. Still, Rocco remained firm. Passengers nearby were starting to take notice, whispering and checking their phones. The tension in the air grew thicker with each second. Rocco barked once. Sharp, demanding. That was enough. Clara straightened her posture and radioed for a supervisor. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes never left the man in front of her. "Security screening protocol for flight crew," she said, keeping her voice low, "is allowed when a K9 unit gives a confirmed alert. I need you to comply, Captain." Lutz sighed and glanced toward the gate. Then he looked back at Rocco. The shepherd did not blink. "Fine," he said stiffly. "But this is coming out in my report." As Clara guided the pilot away from the gate, she gave Rocco a silent nod. You know something, don't you, boy? And Rocco, still alert, still focused, walked beside her without a sound. The private screening room smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. It was a narrow space with 2 chairs, a stainless steel table, and walls so white they seemed to hume under the fluorescent lights. Clara Mendes stood near the door, her hand still lightly gripping Rocco's harness. The shepherd sat silently beside her, his eyes trained on the man across the room. Captain Adrian Lutz sat with his legs crossed and arms folded. His uniform remained immaculate, not a single crease out of place. He looked every bit the seasoned professional, but something about his silence felt rehearsed. Security Chief Helena Duarte entered, her steps brisk. She was a tall woman in her early 50s with a face carved from discipline. She had reviewed enough K9 alerts to know when something warranted escalation and when it was simply a mistake. Clara briefed her quickly. K9 alert was strong and sustained, she said. Rocco blocked him from boarding. First alert was near the main corridor, second near the left side of his jacket. Duarte studied Lutz for a long second. You're the lead on flight 417. Yes, Lutz replied. And we are now 35 minutes behind schedule because your dog is confused. Duarte gave a polite nod. We appreciate your cooperation, Captain. This won't take long. Officer Mendes, proceed. Clara stepped forward, her voice calm. Sir, I'll need to inspect your personal items. Please place your bag, wallet, phone, and any accessories on the table. Lutz obliged with a visible sigh. He removed his watch, keys, phone, and a slim leather wallet. Then he set down his black flight bag and took off his pilot wings pin, placing it delicately beside the rest. Clara unzipped the flight bag. Inside, she found a rolled-up flight plan, a clipboard with notes, a paperback novel, and a toiletry kit. Nothing out of the ordinary. Still, Rocco did not relax. Clara glanced at him. His ears remained forward. His nose twitched, but he held still, like a statue carved from fur and instinct. Next, the jacket. She held out her hand. Captain, may I have your uniform jacket, please? Lutz hesitated. The delay was brief, no more than a second, but Clara noticed it. He removed the garment slowly and placed it on the table. As she began checking the seams and inner pockets, her fingers passed over the collar. She paused. Something felt wrong. She ran her thumb along the inner lining. The stitching there was tighter, almost unnaturally precise, not the standard pattern issued by any commercial airline. She looked at Duarte. This stitching is different. I need the portable scanner. A technician was called in, wheeling a compact imaging device into the room. As he adjusted the settings and began passing the scanner over the garment, Clara felt her pulse quicken. Rocco had now risen to a standing posture. His nose was inches from the jacket, and his body had gone completely still. There, the technician said, pointing at the screen. A small rectangular shadow appeared just under the left lapel. Clara leaned in. It was thin, almost paper-like, embedded between 2 layers of fabric. What is it? Duarte asked. Unknown. Electronic signature confirmed. Could be a transmitter. Could be something else. Lutz shifted in his seat. You cannot be serious, he said, his voice colder now. That jacket is custom made in Munich. It's never been altered. The technician prepared to carefully cut the seam. You're damaging my property, Lutz snapped. If there is nothing there, we will compensate you, Duarte said flatly. If there is something, you will answer for it. Clara felt Rocco tense again. She knelt beside him, one hand steady on his back. Easy, boy. We're close. The technician made the final cut. From inside the seam, he extracted a wafer-thin object, no bigger than a coin. Its surface shimmered slightly under the light. Wires, copper traces, a micropower source embedded at the center. This is not a pin or a tracking device, the technician said. This is custom-built, purpose unknown. Duarte's jaw tightened. She turned to Lutz. Do you want to explain what this is? Lutz looked pale. His lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. His eyes flicked toward the door. Rocco barked sharply. Clara reacted first. He's about to run. She moved to intercept as Lutz bolted from the chair, knocking it to the floor. He lunged toward the hallway. For a moment it looked like he might make it. Then Rocco leapt. Lepta. The shepherd slammed into the pilot's side, bringing him down with practiced precision. Clara was already on top of him, cuffing his wrists as he struggled against the cold floor tiles. "You're under detention by airport security," she said, her voice firm. Lutz's face twisted in rage. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. Clara rose to her feet. "You're right, but we're about to find out." Beside her, Rocco stood tall. He did not bark again. He simply stared at the man on the floor, his eyes steady, his mission just beginning. The secure holding room was quieter now, the kind of silence that buzzed in the ears. Captain Adrian Lutz sat cuffed to a steel chair bolted to the floor. His uniform jacket, now sliced open at the seam, lay on a tray beside a half-finished evidence form. His eyes followed every movement in the room, though he said nothing. Clara Mendes stood by the wall, arms crossed, trying to process what they had found. She glanced down at Rocco, who sat at her feet, calm but watchful. The microdivus recovered from Lutz's jacket rested in an evidence bag on the technician's table. A second, deeper scan was underway. A soft knock echoed from the hallway. Security Chief Helena Duarte opened the door and stepped aside for a man in a charcoal gray suit to enter. He carried himself with the clipped energy of someone used to moving between crisis rooms. "Interpol liaison," Duarte said. "Name's Julian Varga." Varga nodded at Clara and knelt briefly to offer his hand toward Rocco, who gave the agent a brief sniff before returning to stillness. "Impressive animal," Varga said. "What did he pick up?" Clara hesitated. "Not sure. But whatever it was, he knew before we did." The technician called out from the corner of the room. "It's electronic. No wireless signal, but it has a tiny power cell and an embedded receiver. Looks like it's designed to interface with something remotely." Varga's face hardened. "Trigger device?" "Possible. But we'll need more analysis to confirm." Duarte turned toward Lutz. "You have two choices now. You can start talking, or we escalate this to federal charges and call in military counter-terror." Lutz's gaze was cold and level. Then he smiled. "You are already too late." Clara felt a chill trace her spine. She looked at Rocco. He was standing again. "What did you mean by that?" Duarte asked. Lutz tilted his head but said nothing. Varga pulled out his phone and made a quick call in hushed tones. Then he looked at Clara and Duarte. "Get the aircraft cleared. Now." Clara's breath caught. She turned without a word and radioed for the evacuation of Gate 14. Passengers were already boarding Flight 417, a wide-body Airbus scheduled to fly direct to New York. "Attention all units," she said into her radio. "Immediate evacuation of aircraft at Gate 14. Repeat. Immediate." As alarms buzzed in the terminal, the tension in the room cracked wide open. Rocco was already tugging slightly at his harness, his body leaning toward the door. "Take him," Clara said. "Go." Duarte nodded. "Go with the inspection team. Take the dog straight to the cockpit." Within 5 minutes, Clara and Rocco were running alongside a security team across the tarmac. Wind slapped her cheeks and the noise of aircraft engines vibrated in her chest. The stairs had been pulled from the jet, and passengers were being herded back into the terminal. Some shouted in confusion. Others looked up at the sky, bewildered. Inside the aircraft, the cabin lights still glowed with that soft, artificial warmth meant to soothe long-haul passengers. Empty now, it felt eerie. Clara stepped into the cockpit. The co-pilot's seat was pristine. Nothing appeared out of place. Rocco sniffed once, then twice. He moved slowly, deliberately, toward the pilot's seat. Then he stopped. He let out a single breathy bark and pawed lightly at the seat cushion. Clara's heart jumped. She motioned for the technician behind her. "Check under the cushion." He lifted it. Beneath, embedded into the underside of the seat's adjustment mechanism, was a slim black casing. The technician froze. Slowly, he unlatched the casing and opened it. Everyone took a step back. Inside was a flattened cylinder about the size of a small flashlight, wrapped in gray carbon polymer. No labels, no wires exposed. But to trained eyes, it was mistakable. Explosive, the technician whispered, with a remote activation system. Rocco stepped back and sat. The technician swallowed hard. This would have triggered mid-flight. Positioned here, it would have compromised the cockpit floor, possibly breached the avionics systems. Catastrophic. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. Her hand instinctively rested on Rocco's back. He would not let him board. The technician was already on the radio with the bomb disposal unit. Clara stepped outside the cockpit and stared down the long, empty aisle. Overhead bins hung open. A child's stuffed animal lay abandoned on a seat near the rear. She imagined what could have happened at 36,000 feet. Back at the security office, Duarte received the call with a sharp nod. "Get him to interrogation," she ordered. "No more waiting." Lutz was still smirking, but for the first time, Clara noticed a flicker of something else behind his eyes. He was calculating. They always do, she thought. Until something doesn't go to plan. She looked at Rocco, who stood quietly by the door, his head slightly tilted. His eyes locked on the man in the chair. Something told her this was only the beginning. The medical lights above the hospital bed flickered faintly, casting a sterile sheen over the pale face of Captain Adrian Lutz. His hands were cuffed to the bedrails, his uniform replaced by a standard patient gown. Monitors beeped steadily beside him, but the atmosphere in the room was far from calm. Clara stood near the foot of the bed, her arms crossed, watching silently as Interpol liaison Julian Varga flipped through a secured tablet. Security Chief Helena Duarte stood to his left. At the doorway, 2 armed officers kept guard, unmoving. "The microdivus is in the hands of the explosives team," Varga said. "It matches a known signature pattern, one we haven't seen in almost 3 years." Duarte raised an eyebrow. "From where?" "Where?" "Frankfurt. Disappeared from trace after a failed raid on a suspected weapons lab. Now here it is again, sewn into a pilot's collar." Clara kept her gaze fixed on Lutz. He stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched. "Tell us what you planted on that aircraft," Duarte said. "We already found the device. If you cooperate now, you might survive the rest of your life in a prison instead of disappearing into a black site." Lutz turned his head slowly toward her, his expression blank. "You're chasing shadows," he said. "I'm just a pilot who wore the wrong jacket." Varga let out a breath and set the tablet down. Then he pulled up another screen and angled it toward Lutz. "You're not Adrian Lutz. The real Captain Lutz died in Morocco 2 years ago, paragliding accident. Burned remains made identification difficult, but not impossible." He tapped the screen. "Interpol facial recognition ran your airport security footage. You're Martin Grace, formerly of the Bavarian Air Force, declared missing in action and flagged as a suspected asset for a radical organization known as Vega Line." Lutz's eyes flickered for the first time. "You changed your face," Varga continued, "but not well enough." Clara stepped forward, her voice measured. "Why Vega Line? Why the airline?" Still, Lutz Grace said nothing. Duarte leaned down slightly. The bomb was set to trigger once the aircraft reached cruising altitude. Over the Atlantic, no rescue. No survivors. You wanted it to look like a catastrophic failure. Varga added quietly, "You weren't acting alone, were you?" The silence held for several long seconds. Then Grace spoke. "There were supposed to be 3. The words landed like a slap in the room. "3 what?" Duarte asked. "Flights. Coordinated. 1 from Lisbon. 1 from Toronto. 1 from Rome." He closed his eyes. 3 crashes. 3 flags. 1 message. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "When?" she asked. "Within the next 48 hours. My flight was the test case. If it succeeded, the others would follow within the window." Varga was already dialing on his encrypted phone. Duarte signaled to the guard. "Put him under armed sedation. We need every word on record." As nurses moved to administer the sedative, Clara stepped out of the room. She leaned against the corridor wall, the weight of what she had just heard settling on her like a lead coat. She looked down. Rocco sat beside her, alert, quiet, watching her. She reached down and scratched gently behind his ears. "You started this, boy. You saw what no one else did. And you may have saved more lives than any of us ever will." Her radio crackled. Officer Mendez returned to briefing room 1. Possible lead on second target. Urgent. She straightened. "Let's go." As she and Rocco moved down the corridor toward the operations center, Clara's mind reeled. A coordinated multi-airport attack. Custom devices. False identities. Years of planning. And all of it nearly slipped by. If Rocco had not stopped that man at the gate. If she had hesitated. If one voice had overridden her instinct. She swallowed the thought. There were still lives at risk. Still planes in the sky. And somewhere out there, 2 more pilots were preparing to do what Martin Grace had failed to finish. Clara tightened her grip on Rocco's harness. "Not on my watch." The briefing room buzzed with the hum of urgent voices and the clatter of laptops being opened, maps spread, and encrypted calls made. On the screen at the front of the room, flight data streamed in real time, highlighting international departures from major European hubs. Clara Mendez stood near the side wall, hand resting on Rocco's harness as Security Chief Helena Duarte addressed the gathered agents, technicians, and military personnel. "Interpol has just confirmed it," Duarte announced. "The pilot assigned to Flight AS-116, Rome to Toronto, is flying under falsified credentials." Julian Vargas stepped in beside her. Name listed as Captain Silvio Marchetti, but the real Marchetti died 6 months ago. Dental records confirm it. The man boarding that aircraft today is an imposter. He turned to Clara. "Just like Grace." Clara's breath caught. She looked down at Rocco. His posture had shifted, still calm, but head raised as if he too sensed the urgency rising in the room. "Where is that aircraft now?" Clara asked. "Boarding. Gate 9, Leonardo da Vinci Airport, scheduled to depart in 30 minutes. And the pilot? Already on board. In the cockpit." Dort snapped orders. "Italian authorities are coordinating a hold. No announcement yet. They want to avoid panic, but we have a small window." A technician pulled up the gate camera feed. The image froze on the face of a man in uniform, stepping through the jet bridge. His eyes were concealed by aviator sunglasses, but the resemblance to a known Vega Line associate Nicholas Bergstrom was unmistakable. "We need boots on the ground," Vargas said. "But we don't have a unit in Rome with a canine handler who can screen him properly." Clara's heart beat faster. "Send us." Dort looked at her. "You and Rocco?" "We're ready. He's already picked up one. He may recognize something in the second." Varga hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "A private Interpol jet is ready on standby. Wheels up in 15. Clara turned to Rocco. "You hear that, boy?" The shepherd looked up, as if he had understood every word. The jet streaked through the morning sky above the Mediterranean, flying low and fast. Clara sat across from Rocco, double-checking his vest and safety harness. Her hands moved on instinct, though her mind ran in loops. If the man on that flight was anything like Grace, the device might already be hidden on board, maybe embedded in the cockpit again, maybe worse. She closed her eyes and replayed the moment Rocco had blocked Grace in Lisbon. It hadn't been fear in the pilot's eyes, it had been calculation. Delay, deflect, deceive. But Rocco had seen through it. And now they had to trust he would do it again. Rome's Leonardo da Vinci Airport was a blur of noise and movement as Clara and Rocco exited the tarmac and entered the secure terminal corridor. 2 Italian officers met them with clipped English and tired eyes. "He is still on board," one said. "Passengers delayed by a maintenance claim. No announcement of threat has been made." Clara nodded and tightened Rocco's harness. "Take us to the aircraft." They were escorted to the boarding gate, where the doors had been sealed. The jet bridge was empty. Clara knelt in front of Rocco and placed both hands on his shoulders. "This is important," she whispered. "You're the only one who can find it." He stared at her, ears forward, muscles steady. They stepped onto the aircraft. The lights were dimmed. The air was cold, filled with that familiar recycled scent of aviation fuel and stale fabric. Rocco moved ahead slowly, nose working, head swiveling as he scanned. The cockpit door was closed. Clara approached with one of the officers and knocked. A moment passed. Then it opened. The man inside wore the proper uniform. His face was calm, but Rocco took one look and growled. Deep and low. Clara stepped back. "Sir, we're requesting a last-minute secondary clearance," she said. "Please step out of the cockpit." The pilot's eyes shifted briefly toward the panel behind him, then back to her. "I don't believe that's necessary." But Rocco had already moved forward, placing himself squarely between Clara and the pilot. He barked, loud and sharp. "Step out," Clara said again. "Now." The man hesitated, then slowly complied. As he moved, Rocco circled him, sniffing at his lower back. Then, without warning, the shepherd lunged forward and pawed hard at the man's left boot. Everyone froze. The pilot went pale. A technician rushed forward with a scanner and waved it over the boot. A soft beep responded. "There's something inside." Security officers restrained the man instantly. Clara crouched beside Rocco, heart racing. Inside the hollow heel of the boot, they would later find a second triggering device smaller than the first, but connected to a concealed detonation pack embedded beneath the co-pilot seat cushion. It would have triggered over the Atlantic. 211 lives. Saved again by a dog who refused to look away. Clara sat in the debriefing room 3 hours later, her face smudged, her mind exhausted. Rocco lay on the floor beside her, head resting on his front paws. Dort's voice came through the secure line from Lisbon. "We've confirmed the identity. Nicholas Bergstrom, Vega Line, same group, same plan. If you hadn't intervened..." "We didn't," Clara said quietly. "Rocco did." She looked down at him. "He just keeps seeing what we miss." Back in Lisbon, dusk fell over Humberto Delgado Airport like a curtain drawn tight. The last golden light of the sun flared against the runway before vanishing into the horizon. Inside the operations center, Clara stood in front of a wall of screens displaying intercepted data, surveillance feeds, and maps overlaid with blinking markers. She had not slept since Rome. Neither had Rocco. He sat beside her, quiet as ever, but his ears twitched at every sharp movement, every raised voice, every scent that passed beneath the door. Julian Varga was seated at a central workstation, typing furiously. Chief Duarte leaned against a whiteboard, her expression grim. "We've stopped 2 attempts," Duarte said, but neither Grace nor Bergstrom were carrying detailed schematics to him. No hard files, no blueprint of the wider plan. Varga didn't look up from his screen. They didn't need to. They were part of a cell, tight structure, minimal knowledge. Someone else was coordinating, probably from a local base of operations. He paused, then turned the tablet toward Clara. "This is a maintenance log from 2 nights ago. A subcontracted electrical team accessed the sublevels beneath Terminal C. They claimed to be updating runway signal relays." Clara frowned. 2 nights ago. Yes, before Grace's flight. And they signed in, but they never signed out. No work order was filed. No confirmation that any updates were done. Dort stepped forward. "You think they're still here?" Varga nodded. "Or they were. Which means if Vega Line had a nerve center in Lisbon, it might not be across the city. It might be under our feet." Clara glanced at Rocco. He was already standing. "Where do we start?" she asked. Varga pulled up a blueprint of the airport's older sectors. "Here, Utility Building D, access tunnel to power relays. But this corridor is off the current records. It was part of an expansion from the late 80s, never updated in the digital database." "Of course," Clara murmured, hidden in plain sight. An hour later, a tactical unit assembled in silence at the back edge of the airport's airfield. Snow had begun to drift in from the north, turning the tarmac pale under the night lights. The wind howled through the open maintenance bay as Clara tightened Rocco's protective vest and checked the strap on his boot covers. "You ready, boy?" she whispered. Rocco responded by sitting, posture alert, tail flicking once against her boot. Varga approached from the shadows. No sound, no alarms, We need what's inside intact. One of the suspects may still be in there, using the delay from the failed attacks to initiate a cleanup. Clara nodded. Then she and Rocco led the way down a narrow stairwell, its walls slick with condensation. At the bottom, the air grew warmer, more metallic. A hallway stretched ahead. Lights flickered. Doors lined one side. On the other was a wide metal cabinet labeled electrical access only. Rocco stopped. Clara felt him stiffen beneath her palm. He leaned toward the cabinet, nose twitching rapidly. Then he growled low and focused. "Here," she whispered into her radio. The team fanned out. Clara opened the cabinet door slowly. Inside, she expected cables. Instead, she found a keypad, and behind it a second false panel. Rocco barked once. "Sir." Tactical officers stepped forward and opened the second panel. Beyond it, a staircase descended into a concrete chamber lit with blue-tinted LEDs. It was cold, humming faintly with the buzz of electronics. Inside, they found the heart of Vega Line's Lisbon cell. Computers lined the walls. A folding table held open schematics of aircraft interiors, annotated with red ink. Airline crew photos were pinned beside security rotation schedules. In the far corner, a row of metal cases stacked neatly, each one marked with symbols that meant nothing to most. But to Clara, they looked eerily familiar. Trigger kits. Duh. Like the ones they had pulled from Grace and Bergstrom. A technician opened one slowly. "This one is new," he said. "Refined. Smaller. These weren't for the planes we already stopped." Dort's voice came through the earpiece. "How many?" "At least 20. There was a pause. "This wasn't just a 3-plane attack," Duarte said quietly. "It was phase 1 of something bigger." Clara stepped to the far wall, where Rocco had pressed his nose against a steel vent cover. She pried it open and pulled out a black box hidden behind it. Inside, a hard drive, wrapped in plastic, still warm to the touch. "One last copy," she said, handing it to the technician. "We need to see what's on it," Varga said. "Every name, every route, every leak in the system." Clara looked around the room at the blinking terminals, the quiet hum of information hiding in the dark. They had stopped 2 flights. But this room meant dozens more had been prepared. She turned to Rocco. "We're not done yet, are we?" The dog looked back at her, his eyes steady. They had followed his instincts this far, and they would keep going until the sky was safe again. The hum of the server drives echoed like whispers in a crypt. Inside a secure data lab beneath Lisbon's national security complex, the air was cold and dry, thick with static and urgency. Technicians in dark uniforms hunched over rows of monitors, sifting through terabytes of data pulled from the hard drive found behind the vent. Clara stood behind them, arms crossed, exhaustion heavy in her shoulders. Rocco lay by the door, dozing with one eye half open. His breathing was slow, steady. But like Clara, he was only resting, not relaxed. Julian Varga entered carrying 2 cups of black coffee. He handed one to her without a word. "They found something," he said after a pause. Clara followed him to a monitor where a technician had paused a video feed. This was pulled from a folder marked Phase Transition Protocols. It's a planning session recorded 5 weeks ago. The screen flickered to life. A room appeared windowless, lit by hanging bulbs, its walls unfinished. At the far end stood a woman in a long dark coat, her back to the camera. Her voice was clear, low, and precise. "We delay," she said, "only if necessary. Not out of fear, not out of mercy. Delay is a tool, not a weakness." She turned slowly, revealing sharp features, short blonde hair, and eyes that never seemed to blink. The room fell quiet. "That's her," Varga said. "That's the one they call the coordinator." Clara leaned in. "What else do we have?" "A name. Possibly fake. But the video feed was uploaded from a secure IP near the Lisbon airport, just 24 hours before Grace was stopped. There's more." He pressed a key, switching screens. The coordinator had issued final routing orders for 3 individuals beyond Grace and Bergstrom. One of them had been flagged at Charles de Gaulle yesterday, but released after a security delay. He's on the move. Where? Clara asked. The routing files say Zurich. She's deploying him anyway. After the failure? Varga nodded grimly. The coordinator is cleaning house. Last moves. Or a fallback plan. What about her? Clara asked. Is she still here? We don't know. Ah. Varga lowered his voice. But the flight logs from terminal maintenance show a private jet under the name A. Morova filed for departure 2 hours from now. Registered to a shell corporation tied to a Vega Line funding source. Let me guess, Clara said. No photo ID on the pilot. No visible manifest. Exactly. Rocco had risen, ears pricked. Clara turned toward him. You feel it too, huh? She grabbed her jacket, her badge, and Rocco's leash. We need to intercept that aircraft. The private hangars at the far end of Humberto Delgado Airport were quiet this time of night. Snow had started again, drifting under the security lights in thin, swirling sheets. The aircraft in question sat at the end of runway 6, a sleek black Gulfstream, quiet, almost elegant. Clara and Rocco waited behind a row of service vehicles while tactical teams circled into position. From this angle, they had a clear view of the staircase attached to the cabin door. No one had boarded yet, but the engines were warming. A woman appeared at the top of the steps. Even from this distance, Clara recognized her. Same blonde hair, same calm posture. It's her, Clara whispered into her radio. The coordinator. Varga's voice responded. Hold. We want her alive. Clara moved forward slowly, Rocco at her side. The night air burned in her lungs. She could hear the thrum of the jet's turbines, soft but rising. The woman looked down. Saw them. She didn't run. She lifted a phone, pressed one button, and smiled. Clara broke into a run. Rocco surged forward. A sharp bark cracked the silence. 2 officers intercepted the woman at the stairs and pulled her down. The phone clattered onto the tarmac. Clara snatched it up. Still active. 1 message sent. Just 1 word. Now. Back at command, the decrypted message was traced to Zurich. Varga slammed a hand against the desk. It's a trigger signal. She tried to activate the Zurich up remotely. Clara looked at the coordinator, now handcuffed, silent, sitting in a white room under floodlights. Her expression was unreadable. We have teams moving, Duarte said. Zurich's air control is cooperating. We may be able to stop him. The coordinator finally spoke. You're too late. Her voice was soft, certain. You only think you understand what you've interrupted. You think this was about planes. Clara stepped forward. Then what was it about? The coordinator tilted her head slightly. Instability. Doubt. A single crack in the idea of safety. Once it forms, it spreads. She smiled. You haven't stopped anything. You've only delayed it. Clara looked at Rocco. He stood beside her, still and alert, watching the woman. Listening. And maybe, just maybe, seeing what no one else could. The sky above Zurich was pale and cloudless, streaked with contrails from early morning flights leaving the airport, like silver threads across glass. But inside Zurich International, calm had been replaced with calculation. A joint Swiss-Portuguese security team moved in silence through the West Terminal, guided by encrypted instructions sent from Lisbon just minutes earlier. Clara walked beside them, Rocco at her side. Neither had slept. Neither showed any signs of stopping. The coordinator had revealed no further names, no locations, but the message she sent now had been enough. A private jet, similar in build to the others used by Vega Line, had filed for departure from Zurich under the name Victor Stein, a pilot with no verifiable flight history. The aircraft sat idle on a restricted runway, scheduled for a long-range test flight to Cape Town. But no test pilot had ever trained on that route. Clara approached the aircraft, her heart hammering beneath her coat. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Rocco walked just ahead, nose raised, tail lowered. He moved like a hunter approaching an invisible threat. The co-pilot door was open. A single man stood near the wing, clipboard in hand, speaking to a ground tech in Swiss German. "That's him," someone whispered. Clara moved in. "Excuse me, sir," she said in English. "Could we speak with you a moment?" The man turned. His eyes were light, calculating, already searching for the nearest exit. Rocco barked. It wasn't loud, but it stopped everyone cold. The man dropped the clipboard and ran. Rocco launched after him. The suspect darted between fuel trucks and emergency lights, sprinting toward the hangars. But Rocco moved faster, his paws thudding softly over snow-covered tarmac, body low, perfectly focused. He lunged, catching the man by the arm and spinning him to the ground. Clara arrived seconds later, breath visible in the cold. Rocco released on command. Officers tackled the suspect fully, restraining him. In his pocket, they found a second triggering device identical in design to the one found on Grace in Lisbon. Inside the cockpit of the aircraft, hidden behind a false avionics panel, was a third explosive charge. Sophisticated. Silent. If armed, it would have detonated somewhere over the Mediterranean. Another plane. Another 100 lives. Stopped by one bark. 2 days later, back in Lisbon, the world was slowly learning what had almost happened. International news outlets ran vague headlines about coordinated aviation threats, praising cross-border cooperation without revealing the true scope of what had been planned. The official story remained tightly managed. But those who had been inside the operations room knew the truth. At the center of it all, a German shepherd sat quietly beside his handler as the Minister of Interior placed a silver badge on his collar. "For exceptional service," she said, "to this country, and to every nation that flies freely across the skies." Reporters asked questions. Chimeras flashed, but Rocco didn't flinch. He looked up at Clara, his tail brushing the floor. After the ceremony, they returned to the terminal not for duty, but to walk. The airport was bustling again. Children ran beside rolling suitcases. Families reunited at the arrivals gate. The snow had melted off the runway. "You did it," Clara whispered. "You stopped 3 planes." But Rocco just kept walking. He did not need praise. He did not need medals. He had simply known something was wrong and had refused to back down until someone listened. As they approached the main hall, Clara caught sight of a flight board blinking with green departures. She smiled, then crouched beside her partner, ready for whatever's next. Rocco looked toward the nearest gate, and for the first time in days, he wagged his tail. "Thank you for staying with us until the end of this incredible story. If you found it as powerful and thought-provoking as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next gripping journey. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Share your opinions, questions, or personal stories in the comments below. Your voice matters, and we read every single one.